Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Jeff Newkirk, who is the founder and CEO of PEM Consulting Group. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Hey, Mike, thanks a lot. Great to be here.
Hey, so I want to get started with giving us a little bit of background on yourself. What led you to start the PEM Consulting Group? Because I know that many times it's always a story of, I made these successes and I went through these trials in my business, and that led me to learn these lessons and then led me to guide other businesses through. So I always love to hear that backstory. So give us a little bit of background, and then what is PEM Consulting Group?
Sure. Yeah. So I spent about 30 years or so in the corporate world and served in different administrative positions in operations and finance. And I've also been in management consulting, where I've worked with small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and large corporations. And, at this point in my career, I felt like it was time to strike out on my own. And so I did that late last year. And really just want to go out and help those other business owners, executives, leaders in organizations, and help them to achieve whatever they're seeking to achieve. In our mission statement, I state we're a management consulting firm dedicated to serving business owners, executives, and leaders to achieve excellence. But excellence is sort of ambiguous, right? So it's really what they're looking for in their business. And more times than not, it's to improve their bottom line. But I wanted to really put all of this background, all of this experience, my education, and serve the business community and do it the best way that I know how.
Yeah, I love that intro, because it really does show that you come through and learn, and then you want to give back. You go back from, striving to thriving and all of these levels. So that's a wonderful approach to take. And when you work with businesses, I'm sure they feel that. And it makes me think of that word that you mentioned, excellence. And it is ambiguous, and it is a different definition for everybody, I would suspect. So I would like to ask, what is your definition of excellence? And then how do you determine, when you're working with a business, what their definition is and then how to help them achieve it?
Oh, that's a great question. So from my perspective, excellence is really fulfilling my purpose. And my purpose in working with a client is helping them to achieve whatever they need, whatever their needs are, meeting their or working on their pain points, whether it's a struggling business and operations, or their profit margin, or sometimes it's just them personally trying to get a grip on what their tasks are, what their to-dos are. So excellence to me is really fulfilling my purpose and helping others to understand what their purpose is. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they need some assistance in helping define what their goals should be, and then to define the tasks associated with those goals and help them get there. So sometimes it's as easy as just, bullet point some things out, but sometimes it's a little bit more complicated. And for me, it's just, again, fulfilling my purpose. And after being in the corporate world for so long, I'd like to think I've learned a little bit. I've certainly experienced a lot. And it's really about serving others, right? I mean, we only get to feel like we've achieved and we've fulfilled our purpose when we have adequately served others.
Yeah, it reminds me of that old Zig Ziglar quote, you can get everything you want in life if you help other people achieve what they want, because you just kind of create that connection with people. And through
is anybody better than Zig Ziglar, Mike? I mean, really?
Yeah, I know. I saw him live quite a few times, and his getting down on one knee, and it just what a real guy he was, and
So
just
genuine.
genuine and just timely and timeless advice. And it kind of makes me think back what you just said about, you would think that a consulting group working with larger organizations and let's look at your bottom line and let's work with your leadership team. But you mentioned something I want to clarify and maybe even shine a light on is it sounds to me like you don't only look at the professional side, but also how the personal side of the clients or the organization impact that. So do you find that there is a correlation between someone's personal excellence and how that impacts their professional excellence?
Oh, no question. And I've always been of the thought process that, work is work and personal is personal. And you leave the personal at the door when you're at work. And I definitely believe in order to maintain a professional environment, professional atmosphere, it is about work. However, people, we're human, right? And sometimes those emotions and those feelings and those experiences that we have in our personal life, it carries over. And we need to be able to better understand ourselves so we can be more productive and more valuable to the organization. And sometimes that's takes somebody else to sort of help recognize that in someone. So it is a blend. And, my thought is you always have to be professional, right? In the workplace, it's, you are held to a certain standard, especially as a leader, you need to provide that example, set that example for professionalism. But you also have to understand what makes you tick. What is it in your personal life that bleeds over into your professional so you can be the leader that you need to be and set that example that you need to set. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I was remembering when you were talking about that so many times as a business leader or a thought leader, you have to set the tone. And sometimes that tone is set first by who you are personally so that they feel connected and resonate with you on a personal level so that when you bring in those same disciplines to the professional level, they can see that you walk your talk and they realize that these days real is rare. And when you're real and authentic and transparent, personally and professionally, that's the perfect synergy.
Oh, couldn't agree more. Being yourself, being honest, having integrity. That's what it's all about. I really believe that old cliche, you're only as good as your word. It's just true.
Yeah.
And people will see through it. If you're not being honest with somebody, people can see that.
Yeah. These days, I think that people, their time is so limited that they don't have time to, let's just give it a chance. They go with that gut reaction. So I think that authenticity is so important. Hey, let's talk about PEM Consulting Group. What is the typical type of client that you work with, and what is the outcome that you help them achieve?
Yeah, so the typical client, I would say, is a small to medium-sized business, typically less than 500 employees or 50 million or less in gross revenue. Although I have to say I have worked with large organizations as well, but really the typical client will be the small to medium-sized businesses. And it really depends what their needs are. If it's something urgent, then we're probably looking at what is their cash flow problem, because cash is king, right? If you don't have cash, you're not able to pay your bills and you're not able to sustain the business. So if it's an urgent need, it's predominantly somewhere in the cash, whether it's income, outflow, but we're looking at the cash balance. If it's more of a long-term situation, then we're strategizing. We're looking at more big picture stuff. We're trying to figure out their business model, and does the business model fit their mission, their vision for the business, and then how do we fit all of those pieces together of their strategic plan into a workable and feasible budget. So they know where they're going. So we've set the roadmap for them for success. So if it's short term, it's more, we got some bleeding that we need to stop right away. And typically that bleeding is the cash balance. And if it's long term, it's more strategizing and building a successful business for the future.
Do you find that some people will come to you with one need, which they feel is urgent, but in reality, the 30,000 foot view from the outside looking in, you look at it and say, okay, we can fix this or start working on it to really put a little bit of a Band-Aid on this, but the bigger problem is this. So do you find that their ultimate outcome is not what they were thinking that they needed, but because of where you're looking at it from perspective, that you're able to bring a whole new perspective and light to what they were actually asking for?
Yeah, so I would say yes, that has happened. I've had situations where I've talked to a business owner and they think that there's a certain urgent issue associated with certain, for example, one was an issue with one of their employees, and their employees, this particular employee was creating a toxic environment. That toxic environment was hurting the business overall. And so what I tried to do was look at all different sides of that situation. So was the employee toxic? Well, certainly I couldn't know that just from talking to the business owner, but what we tried to understand is what was the situation around this particular employee? Why did the business owner think it was toxic? And what are some of the things that could be addressed short term and long term to correct the situation? And you really need to just bring in all different parts of the equation. So it's not just, okay, we need to eliminate that employee right now. That's not the point. It's understanding what is creating that situation. Why does the business owner think this employee?
Yeah, I was really right when you were saying what is creating that situation. I was wondering if you find that there are the influences within the organization that are maybe that's what's toxic, and in employee A, they exhibit, their reaction to that toxic internal situation this way, but employee B, it's a whole different, outcome. Whereas, one might be like, oh, I'm now becoming a toxic employee, but another person might not exhibit that, but they might shirk on their work and come in later, leave early, or put in lackluster. But it's the same reaction to maybe it's management, maybe it's the way that they let things go on. And if you can see that might have a domino cascading effect of improvement.
Well, it definitely does. And people's perceptions become their realities, right?
Yeah.
So if they perceive something to be one way, that's all of a sudden to them, that's the way it really is. And you need to help them to understand that there are different sides to look at. And the best way to understand is to understand the situation is to understand yourself and what makes you think the way you do. So, one thing I love is this behavioral assessment tool. I have to be certified in the DISC behavioral assessment, and it really helps to understand where somebody is coming from, how they communicate, why do they communicate that way. And it doesn't mean that particular employee is toxic. They might be, but we have to better understand the whys behind the behavior. And like you said, it could be something going on within the organization. But when I'm talking to a business owner and they are really stressed about a situation and they want some answers right away, I try to give them some comfort in knowing that there are some quick things to at least review, maybe not act on, but look at. And then we talk through more of a longer term strategy because, people want to feel like they're being heard.
Yes.
I certainly want to do that. I want to listen to them. I want to make sure that I've clearly identified what they're trying to convey, what are their pain points, and then we try to work through whether there's a
Because
short-term.
if you think that there's a bigger problem than what they're talking about because of your experience, it would be counterproductive to say, oh, that's not really the problem. Here's what it is. And then they really don't feel heard and they feel like you were bulldozing over them. So if I'm hearing you correctly, the way to approach that is, okay, good. Let's address this and this and this problem that you're talking about right here. And then you give them some quick fixes and then say, you know what, we're going to go a lot deeper on this, but here's what I would like to suggest. Here's a bigger opportunity. And I've even heard it said in the past, years ago, I heard a speaker talking about the hotel industry, and they trained their front desk when there was an irate customer coming up to the desk, not to stick your head in the back and say, boss, there's a problem we need to deal with. They literally stick their head in the back so that the customer can hear this and say, sir, we have an opportunity. Can you come out here? And the opportunity is to deal with this in a great way. So yeah, that's a really, really good point that you bring up there.
I think it's goes back to that old management customer service approach: moment of magic or a moment of misery, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah, that's really good.
Make that moment of magic, and it starts by listening. You gotta listen to the other person, and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so what would you say, Jeff, is one big problem that you specialize in solving? Because your clients will come to you with a variety of problems, real problems that you're going to work on. But what do you find is kind of that common thread that you really focus on solving?
I think it's more looking at the big picture and then getting more focused. And what I mean by that is somebody will come to me with a specific issue, and I think it's inappropriate to just, we've already alluded to it, but to address that issue without looking at the big picture. So I try to look at all of the different sides of the equation and do a comprehensive review of what's going on within the organization, and then get more focused, get more narrow, and then really address whatever issues are going on. And it might be something simple, but it might be something more complicated. But typically, one problem is not just one problem. There's more to it than that. So we need to look at the big picture in order to understand why this one problem is existing, and then address it. And it's probably more than just that one issue. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I would suspect that you have to have a gentle type of way to make sure that when someone comes to you and says, here's my problem, and they're kind of holding it in their hand and talking about this thing, that you're going, yeah, that is a problem, but let's look at this bigger picture. Let's look at and let's focus on this bigger thing, because
absolutely,
I think that until they see that real connection between your 30,000 foot view and their problem, and kind of see the dotted lines connecting that, that they're not going to fully understand that and then go, okay, good, I see that. Now I'm ready to move forward in some of your recommendations. Do you find that they're typically more on the financial end or the personnel leadership side of things? Which do you find is more prevalent?
Well, it all ends up in the financial side, right? I mean, everything leads to the bottom line. At least that's from the business owner or the leader. Everything is bottom line driven. So there's always going to be a financial component. Really, 99% of the issues that come up, there's going to be some type of financial part of that situation. Now, does it mean that that's the problem? No, it doesn't. Right. But there is going to be some financial implication. So for me to say, well, it's all financially driven, I would say that would be inappropriate, but I have to keep in mind that there are financial implications associated with almost every single problem that comes up, whether it's supply, operations, systems, people. We have to look at the problem from a big picture, get more focused, and keep in mind that there are financial implications associated.
Because it seems that the money, the finances, and performance is the indicator, the key indicator that organizations typically look to. Because at their annual meeting, they don't say, our disc profile have improved greatly. Nobody cares about that. They want to see the money. And so that tends to be kind of that pain point. But in reality, while you're working on the money, there's some other opportunities to polish up so that it does positively impact how the money flows in or out.
That's correct. And like I said, I mean, almost every situation that comes up within an organization, just like we were discussing earlier, the toxic employee, there are financial implications associated with that.
Yep.
There are labor costs, there's inefficiencies, lack of productivity throughout the organization, time spent in dealing with this particular situation. There's opportunity costs there. So there are always financial implications to keep in mind when you're addressing another issue within the organization. But there are times that there are specific issues associated with the financials. So that is true too. We need to keep that in the front of our minds too in order of assessing a situation.
Yeah, while we do say there's outside implications that impact the money, let's not ignore the fact that there are some financial decisions and problems within just the financial statements that need to be dealt with as well. So it's a synergy. It's a flow in, out, and looking at everything holistically.
And what's going on right now in our world, people are stressed, anxious, and want some quick solutions, and those solutions need to be financially driven. And there are steps that we can go through to look at those, financially driven issues and concerns they have within the business. For example, I was talking to a business owner, and the urgent need was cash, which is, very typical, where cash is a problem right now. So what can we do to enhance the cash balance? Well, there are specific steps that can be done to look at different elements of the cash balance, whether that's expediting receivables or working with vendors to work on your payables, or, so those are the directly financially related issues that can be addressed aside from all of the outside issues like labor, supply, etc. Does that make sense? Mike?
Yeah, so I know that you call yourself a forensic financialist. Can you explain what this is? Because that sounds like a very curious label.
Sure. So, I don't want that to get confused with forensic accounting. That is a specific discipline, investigating accounting standards and business needs that adhere to law. That's not what I don't pretend to be a forensic accountant, but as a forensic financialist, what I'd like to describe that as is somebody that looks at the financial situation from all different components, all different sides, as we've already been talking about, and then getting a little bit more narrow in the examination of a particular situation to determine what is going to enhance or improve financial performance. So it's looking at the big picture, the financial picture overall, just looking at like bottom line, balance sheet in total, cash flow. What are the big picture outcomes of a particular situation? Then let's fine tune. What I mean by that, let's examine the detail and adjust where we need to enhance financial performance.
Forensic gives me the connotation of like being an investigator, kind of like from the criminal justice side of things. In forensics, you're looking and digging and looking at all options. So probably from the financial side of things, it has a similar connotation where you're not just looking at this set of numbers and going, here's the answer. You're stepping back and looking at all kinds of angles. Like you said, you're kind of bringing in a whole lot of holistic approaches. And do you find that is almost kind of like a getting really detailed to being like that detective work, and it kind of, you're diving into what ifs. Well, what if this were changed? What implication would that have?
Absolutely. So the way I like to look at it is the first stage is the review part. And you're looking at more of the big picture outcomes of the organization. Like I said, it's either cash flow, profit and loss, balance sheet, and you're looking at the financial performance from more of a 15,000 foot view. So you're not way up in the clouds, but you're kind of getting into how the organization is doing, just bottom line wise. Then you see, okay, this is how we're doing overall. What is creating that end result? Let's look at the details. Let's look at some of the financial metrics associated with the performance and see if we can find what is going askew or what's spot on. And are there any adjustments that we need to make that will improve the financial performance going forward? But you really have to start at that review point, the review stage, to understand where you need to dig deeper. And when you're digging deeper, when you're looking at what I would refer to as the examination stage, that's where it gets fun. That's where you're doing the detective work to figure out, okay, if we do X, we'll have a better outcome. If we do Y, this will have a different impact. So at the examination point, you're really in the weeds. You're doing your investigation, but the overarching goal is improve financial performance. Does that make sense?
It totally does, and I think that you have to, this overlay that we're talking about, this solution, has implications in finances as well as any other area of the business. Now, I know you're talking about the finances right now with reviewing where we're at, and I want to dig in deep on this here, just from a cursory view, but. Don't you think also that the same principles would apply to, interpersonal, let's say that the leadership says, hey, our leadership style just doesn't seem to be clicking along like it was before. Wouldn't you review that and examine the details there as well?
Absolutely. So the approach that I like to use, I call it the rear view approach. And the rear view approach is a way to look at and understand your past so you can better plan for future success. So rear view, you're looking back, you're understanding what happened, but now you're planning for a better future.
Yeah.
So you're reviewing the big picture, you're examining the details, then you're adjusting where you need to, and then you revise and realize the outcome, the fruits of your labor. And you can apply this to any part of the business or personal. You always want to look at the big picture first. Then you need to examine what are the implications as to why this happened. What are the specifics, the tacticals that you need to really refine? And then you're going to refine them. You're going to adjust them. And then you're going to realize the outcome. But it never stops. It's once you get to the realize stage, it's not like, okay, I'm done, move on. It's ongoing.
As you were
going back.
As you were describing that, I was thinking of kind of a mental picture of this arrow, that goes around in a circle, and it just literally would never stop, because when you get to the revise and realize stage, great. I saw we reviewed this, and then we looked at the details, and we made these adjustments, and okay, good. We now see the fruit of this process. But then maybe not, 2 minutes later, but a very short time later, you need to go, okay, now let's review where we're at from here, because it now sets the bar at a new level. So do you find that when you're working with clients with this REAR approach and they start applying it to, let's just say, their finances, and you walk them through the process, that when they get through it for the first pass and then they come back to review, it could bubble up and make manifest a new set of concerns in that exact same area that were not apparent the first time you went through?
Absolutely. And I would be surprised if that didn't happen at some point. And that's why you continue with the cycle. The worst thing that somebody could do, whether it's a business owner, leader, or even in your personal life, is when you think that you've solve the problem and you're ready to move ahead, and then you just don't do anything. Okay, you become complacent, and that's when problems will surface again, and they'll probably be even bigger than they were. So it's a constant cycle that it just never, it's like a wheel, like you described.
Yeah,
never stops. You got to be prepared to review again.
And it really, in essence, should never stop. I know that when people feel like, let's make some goals for ourselves personally, professionally, in our organization, here's these goals, and yay, we achieved them at the end of the year, check the box. But in reality, it's a big letdown if you allow yourself to feel like I achieved this goal, and then you kind of are at this summit looking around going, now what? And it's literally a letdown. So in reality, it should be this tiered step progression where you achieve this goal. And now let's go back to the REAR approach. We review where we're at currently, and we see where we came from. We see the person or how our organization was improved through this process of achieving this level of goal. And then now we're going to adjust and make the next step. So I would like to ask, how do you work with your organizations when they come to you with this, problem of, let's say, our finances? That's where the bleeding is. Help us stop this. And then you start walking them through this REAR approach. Do you feel like people are wanting to cruise through it quickly just to, stop the bleeding, or are they kind of embracing the process to go, okay, I understand that we have to follow it step by step to get the full impact?
Yeah, I think it depends on how the conversation starts out. So I can sense if somebody is really concerned about an urgent issue, like what's going on right now in our world with the coronavirus. People are very concerned about their businesses, about the future, and they want to stop the bleeding in their business right now. And so for me, it's asking those questions initially, getting an understanding of where they're at, what are their immediate needs, and if it is something that we need to address, like right now, I want to do whatever I can to help them so they can, if it's possible, reduce their stress and anxiety to some extent by, us talking through a particular situation. Now, at the same time, through the questioning, asking them, what are their pain points? What are they hoping to achieve? I can better understand where they're coming from and what their situation is. And then we can guide the conversation accordingly. So initially, if I were to say, hey, let's look at this review approach, I think most people would say, well, what are you talking about? I got some issues over here that we need to address. So it's really, I need to understand where they're coming from. I need to understand what their urgent issues are. And through the course of that conversation and me better understanding what their needs are, of course, I'll introduce the rear view approach and walk through it to make sure that they understand and feel comfortable with how we're going to tackle whatever issues it is at hand.
We've talked about this a minute ago, and you brought up, dealing with a specific current situation in whether it's the economy or the industry or the organization. It doesn't have to be Corona as it is currently. It could be something else that causes a flare up of a need. So what are some other things that could come up in an organization, whether it's the economy or the industry? It could even be internally. And I was kind of wondering about, hey, we're dealing with the opportunity of going public or getting bought out or having a merger, something that could cause that stress to come along to say, we need to either fix a problem with the books or we need to make the books or the financials look as good as possible. So what are some things we can put into place so that we can achieve this? Do you see some of those come up in your work as well?
Oh, absolutely. I worked with several clients in the past where they're trying to improve their market position because competition has intensified. So we're trying to figure out from their perspective what's going to be the best way not to be reactive to the market or the competition that's increased within their area, within their market area, but what can we do proactively that will work within their business model and help them establish themselves for the future so they can withstand any increased competition. And a lot of times it's looking at their strategic plan and maybe developing a new focus. It could be cutting back or paring back in a particular business offering, or maybe it's increasing or adding a new business entirely. So market changes, that's another issue that comes up a lot that we've dealt with and worked well with clients and helping them better position themselves for the future. So you're right. The coronavirus is certainly a very important, critical issue that we're dealing with right now, but there are other things that have happened in different economies that we need to be prepared for as well.
It makes me think of this when we're talking about the REAR approach, your signature concept of review, examine, adjust, revise. And we've applied it to maybe some financial, looking at the financials from a forensic, holistic approach. Do you ever find working with clients that you need to look at the solution to the problem from a holistic approach by integrating in various departments, because we know that this department would impact that department, which has an impact on the bottom line, and you're literally running the REAR approach, concurrently with several departments to see what their current situation is and looking at those details and adjusting. So how does that fit together when you're really, taking it to the next level and making sure that every, department is optimized as good as possible?
That's a great question. And the short answer to that is you always look at other departments. Depending on the complexity and the size of the organization, if you were to just look at one department specifically and address any issues within that department and then call it a day and not take into consideration the bigger picture, meaning other departments that interact with that one particular department, then you're being very short-sighted. In the end, you could really adversely impact that business. You have to look at all of the different relations within the organization, all the different impacts that each department has on another, and certainly in a very large organization where there are hundreds of departments, not every department is going to be impacted, but you have to do your due diligence. You have to understand the dynamics of the organization so you know what departments need to be reviewed and examined so you can do the organization justice in moving forward with your recommendations. The only way you can do the best job you can in helping this organization is to look at all the different departments that are impacted, not just looking at one. That would be something that you'd be really short-sighted. And so you do have to look at all of the different impacts associated with one particular issue.
Like we've been talking about, it might be one flare up in the economy or a market opportunity or a buyout or a merger or, looking to take over a sector of the competition or expand. all of that said, typically you are dealing with coming in and helping people from a holistic view improve their financials and their bottom line. What are you finding is some of your clients' initial kind of reactions to saying, I need to reach out to you for help, but there tends to be maybe even some myths or misconceptions when, people think I need to improve my bottom line. So they intrinsically have this thought in the back of their mind, and then you're coming in with something different. So what are some of the broad stroke myths out there when it comes to, improving an organization's bottom line?
Well, and I think this comes up a lot. It's when there's an urgent need to improve cash flow or profit margin, depending on the organization, the first place that leadership looks at is staff. So, for example, if we cut 25% of our staff, we'll improve our bottom line by X. And the truth is, that's not necessarily the case. I'm not saying that 100% of the time it's not the case, but you have to do your due diligence around a move like that to make sure that it's something that is going to be best for your organization. So there's typically not just one thing that can be changed in order to improve your bottom line. That would just be a short-term solution. And I'm always of the mindset that laying people off or cutting jobs, that is the last resort, because you want to keep your team. Keeping your team creates consistency. It creates loyalty. It seems like there's a short supply of loyalty these days. So we really want to make sure that we keep our teams intact and that they feel like they're valued. And the way we do that is to look at all different sides of the equation, not just staff. There are different areas to look at in order to improve the bottom line. So there's always more than one thing. And the other thing that I would say when organizations are looking at just improving their financial performance, it's not just leadership that is holding the reins on making those decisions. Certainly they are responsible, but everybody in the organization plays a part in improving the organization's bottom line. And what I mean by that is if everybody is working together, if there's a very productive, cohesive team, then they're going to be more efficient. They're going to work harder. They're going to work together to achieve the mission and the vision of the organization. And there'll be a lot of synergies occur within the organization to improve the bottom line. So it's not just leadership that's going to make it happen, and it's not just one thing that's going to improve the bottom line.
You mentioned cut the staff, or I think another myth might be like, improve the bottom line. Let's cut anything else. What? Expenses, cut marketing expenses, cut. And there could be a time for that. Like you said, it's not always this thing. So let's keep our finger on the chess piece before we, release it. So we make it our move. So once we start looking at potential cuts, is workforce the place to cut? Is marketing expense the place to cut? I would venture to say that you find that when a cut happens in any of these categories, you have some momentum shifts. What plays out when you start seeing some of those momentum shifts? Because it could be a negative shift in the wrong direction.
Oh, for sure. And, I'm not alone on this. I mean, we've all been in organizations where, at least most of us, I would say, have been in organizations where there have been layoffs or cutbacks. And we've seen that happen to our colleagues and friends. And, what happens when there is a cutback? What happens within that organization? Do people feel more secure? No, they don't. Do people feel more in line with the mission and the vision of the organization? Not likely. When something like that happens, there's a ripple effect that occurs throughout the entire organization. And hopefully when that happens, there is a long-term plan in place to improve the entire organization. But at least in the short term, there's a ripple effect that occurs throughout. And there's definitely a behavioral shift to some extent where there's insecurity and potentially a lack of loyalty. So some of those efficiencies and productivities will not be quite as strong when something like that happens. And there is a recovery period. People have to feel like they're valued, like they mean something, and that they don't have to be scared all the time coming into work because they're not worried about their future. Fear plays a big part in how people behave, and fear is not a good thing. And
Yes.
I see things play out in a very negative way when people are fearful.
I would suspect that when you're talking with an organization that's in the midst of a crisis, whatever that crisis may be, where they feel like they must focus on the financials and the bottom line, what are some of the misconceptions that you have found that they have about someone like yourself coming in to say, let's look at improving the bottom line? Do they feel like, well, it's no use, it'll take too much time, or we're past the point of help? What are some of the things that you've seen that they might think one way, but you say, hey, that's a good point, but consider this?
I think when that comes up and business owners are looking for or leaders looking for an improved bottom line, they already have something in mind. And when I ask questions and we're talking through the situation and we start talking about potentially other solutions to the issue, then it's sort of like a light bulb comes on, and it's like, oh well, we didn't think about that, but which is a good thing. I mean, we want to really uncover all the different opportunities in order to achieve what they're looking for, and what they're looking for is an improved bottom line. Well, how can we do this? Oh, they're thinking X and I'm thinking Y, and we can look at the big picture, really do that comprehensive review, and in the end, we might certainly address exactly what they are looking to achieve or what they thought in the first place. But we're going to do our due diligence. We're going to do a lot more digging to make sure that it's the right answer for short term and long term. And especially in a service or manufacturing type of organization where there are labor costs are so high, you really want to be sensitive to the fact that when you adjust labor, meaning have layoffs, job cuts, that seems to be like the first place that leadership looks to reduce costs and improve bottom line, but that's not necessarily the best place. So,
it makes me think of you mentioned the word fear, and I want to go deeper on that in a second, but it seems that when an organization is in crisis mode, whatever the crisis might be, right? Because we've talked about several types of outside stressors. They bring in someone like yourself to say, help us stop the bleeding and even prosper through this, right? So let's look at the bottom line. That's the first place that we look. It seems like they just want to jump right in, ready, fire, aim. No. We need to go ready, and then aim, and then fire. It reminds me of the old Abraham Lincoln quote, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. So how does that sharpening the axe relate to even the rear approach cut? Because I would suspect that would tie into your review and examine.
Well, here's the balance. The balance is you don't want to spend so much time reviewing that you miss the opportunity to make some crucial decisions that will positively impact the organization. So you have to strike that balance. Leadership, part of being a good leader is making those tough decisions, right? And not sitting back and waiting and analyzing. That's not the point. The point is you got to strike that balance between getting a comprehensive review and making those critical decisions. And certainly there are times where you have to make decisions that will adversely affect the labor force. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's, and I said it before, it's a last resort, but sometimes you do have to go that direction. Now, that said, you don't do that without doing your comprehensive review, but you don't review and analyze, where it's, analysis paralysis kind of
yes.
thing.
Yeah, I was literally thinking that analysis paralysis. And it's, you bring up a huge word, balance. And that balance will look differently for one organization compared to the other. It's never a cookie cutter. You never walk in and say, here's the deal, because if that's the case, you just download something off the internet. So I love the approach. What you just said was we have to balance it out. If we take too long, we might have missed the opportunity. If we jump too soon, we might have missed an opportunity in that review and examine. So that's a really, really big piece that you bring up with that balance.
Well, and I think that could apply to our personal lives too. I mean, to really kind of simplify this whole approach, I mean, we could use the REAR approach on our personal lives. We can review whatever is going on personally, examine some of the details that we may need to address, and adjust and realize the fruits of our labor. But even on a personal basis, we can't just be review. At some point, we do have to execute, whether it's adjusting our lifestyles to meet a new norm in our world. Whatever the case may be. For parents, it's dealing with your children. Reviewing how they're behaving, adjusting accordingly. Sometimes that review is pretty short, right, as a parent, but we still have to do it.
Yep, in the moment. And it gets back to what we've said before: is your personal life impacts positively or negatively your professional life. If you are fulfilled at home, then you walk into the professional world with the best possible chance of succeeding that day, that quarter, that year. So that's a really, really big piece. And I love that, the way that you're integrating that in. It's the balance between many things internally in the organization, but also let's not forget that personal side. And we talk about balance, and you can't help but to think of work-life balance. And if you were, I guarantee you anyone would say, if they were asked, I could work 22 hours a day if I physically could. There's always work to be done, but there needs to be that balance.
Absolutely. And not just hours in the day, but days in the week. And, I will speak from experience on this. I'm constantly at a battle with myself to find that balance, as I'm sure most people are. And there's a certain time when we just have to step away. And that time that we step away, we're not just, being lazy or slacking off or whatever. We are recharging. We're fine-tuning our minds. We're clearing our head. So when we get back to the issue at hand, we are crystal clear on what needs to be achieved, and we're energized and ready to attack. So that time away is not just, that you're being lazy or slacking off. No, not at all. You are recharging so you can better tackle the problems at hand when you get back.
And I think for type A+++ personalities, they feel like that recharging time is a waste of time. But I would say that those same people would nod their head and say, I've had some of my biggest brainstorm aha moments out fishing, on a vacation, or, out in nature, or doing something that typically would be downtime. So it really is a physiological, a proven fact that you once you kind of relax and kind of get away from the moment, that your mind really can look for those solutions.
Right. And I'll tell you, as a type AAA personality, it's a constant battle for me, but yep. It's still something that is worth waging, because it's better. You're better off for it.
Yep. Hey, so let's jump back over to an organization that is needing to look at that improved bottom line, and we've talked about all the factors that can tie into that. What are some of those fears that an organization would have, like the leader would have, when they're kind of a little apprehensive of kind of peeling back all the layers, and you need all the layers peeled back so you can get to the root of the problem, but there's got to be some apprehensiveness that they would be experiencing? What is it that you see many organizations experiencing that way?
Well, great question. And it really depends on leadership and how secure they are with the decisions that they've made. And if they've done the very best job that they know how to put the organization in a position to succeed. So as a leader, somebody might be a little apprehensive if they're not quite sure that the decisions that they've made were in the best interest of the organization. And they're always holding something back. And, as a consultant coming in, you've got to have all the information, right, in order to make the best recommendations you can for the organization. If you don't have all the information, then you're still working in the dark. You only have certain pieces to the puzzle, but not all the pieces. And I've come across many situations where leadership is very energized to make some decisions that's going to improve the organization. But whoa, we're not going to, we don't need to talk about this part over here. Let's talk about all this other stuff. Well, why aren't we going to talk about this stuff over here? I mean, this is part of the organization. So my point is, leadership needs to be transparent. And if they're not fully transparent, then there's probably a reason. And the only way to get everybody on board and working in the same direction cohesively as a team is that they have the proper information. They feel comfortable that what's going on within the company is right, and they're all working towards a common purpose, a common goal. And if there's some lack of trust, or there's some people feel that they've been deceived, again, perception becomes people's reality, then there's going to be an element of fear that's going to creep in. And I find that when leadership lacks transparency, that's when the troubles start. And, good leaders are always looking to their teams for help, for guidance, and, they're looking to add value to their teams. I'm a big John Maxwell follower. I love everything that he has to say. And John Maxwell really promotes this: every day you've got to add value. Yeah. And leaders need to do that to their teams. Teams need to do that to each other, and back to leadership. It's all about adding value to somebody else. And when there's some sort of insecurity or feeling of deception, that value is taken away.
And I think that fear that they might experience with, they want you to help, and they know they need that improved bottom line, and they know what they assume would look like the outcome of that improved bottom line. So they're going to give you a couple little nuggets and hope that you wave a magic wand and are a mind reader and extract it out. But maybe part of that transparency is a fear that they're going, what if this just doesn't work, right? Or do you find that is a possible fear as well?
Absolutely. So when people are looking to the future and there is uncertainty, there's always an element of fear associated with that, and hesitation. So it's really about doing your due diligence, getting everybody on the same team. And what I mean by that is everybody is in agreement with some of the recommendations that have been made, how those recommendations are going to be implemented. And it's making sure that you've built those relationships, that there is that trust. Because once you have trust, it makes work so much easier, because you feel comfortable with the direction that you're going. And if there is a lack of trust, that creates uncertainty and fear. And that's where things kind of go go south, if you will. I mean,
it's almost like there's that feeling of, what are people going to think? Like if I start making these moves, because, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So what got us into the situation we're in might not be the solution to get us out of it. So we got to do something different. Do you feel that they kind of have a fearful thought of, man, I start making this move and this change? What are people going to think, whether it's their co-workers or even now up above? Here's management going, senior management might think I've lost my mind.
Well, I think it really depends on how those decisions are communicated and implemented. So information is valuable, and the kind of information that is disseminated has got to be the kind of information that's going to give people some sort of comfort that what changes are being made makes sense, that those changes being made are based on research, review, due diligence, everything that's going to be in the best interest of the organization long term. It goes back to the trust. People have to make sure or have to feel comfortable with how the organization is performing and in what direction they're heading and how decisions are made. So once there's this trust and level of comfort, it seems to make things so much better. And when there's not, and fear creeps in, that's when things can get ugly.
Because they're reacting, not responding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Do you think that there's an element too of maybe if I make these broad recommendations and I take this to the team, that it might be beyond their ability to execute, which then brings up another problem, which is, okay, once we get past this thing and start making some improvement, we need to start addressing why you have that concern about the ability of the team. Maybe they need some leadership development. Maybe they need some training. But do you find that the ability level, skill level to execute on these changes becomes an element of fear that the leader or the organization would have as well?
It really comes down to working together on these recommendations and making sure that we're all on the same page with how the recommendations are going to be implemented. And I think the worst case scenario would be for me as a consultant to come in and say, okay, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these recommendations, and then everything will be better, without even conducting any due diligence or making sure that we're all on the same page within the leadership and the organization, as opposed to once those recommendations once they surface, it's a result of me working with leadership, me working with the teams within the organization to develop the recommendations. So the recommendations become pretty obvious, right through all of the analysis and the review that's conducted and working together, that implementation, the risk associated with implementation diminishes greatly because we all know what needs to be done and we all know how it's going to get implemented. So I'm not working in a vacuum at all. I'm working hand in glove with leadership and the teams within the organization to make sure that whatever is recommended is something that can easily be implemented. Or if not easily, it certainly can be implemented.
Or doable, yeah. Do you ever find that some of the recommendations you would bring up to, the main leadership that you're working with, that then needs to go down to the team, that you get any pushback or fear manifesting because you discover that it's really their personal fear, or they don't want to have any risk personally, like if it has blowback, I might lose my position or I might not get that promotion. How do you balance then some of the fears, what their maybe objections for a recommendation might be? How do you tell whether it's an actual objection, like the organization can't do this because, and when it's actually their personal side of fear talking?
Yeah, great question. And I'm the ultimate simplifier, or at least try to be. And what I mean by that is I look at a particular situation and just try to get all of the extra noise out and just look at the issue at hand. And so when somebody is bringing in their personal, I mean, first of all, we're dealing with the organization. So I'm not even really going to worry about somebody else's personal situation until it becomes an issue within the organization. So if somebody is bringing in their personal fears or personal issues within a particular situation within the organization, then it becomes something that we need to deal with. But I'm not going to get too caught up in somebody's own personal fears until it becomes an issue at hand within the organization. Now, it's not to say that it never does, because it does, but then that's a conversation that needs to take place with that particular individual and get a better understanding of why. Why is that happening? Why can't they compartmentalize what's going on in their personal life versus professional, and understand that what is happening at work and what's happening at home, if there are any negatives in either part of their life, they need to be addressed, and we need to work through that. So I'm not saying that I discount it entirely, but when somebody brings in their personal and becomes a fear or more of a fear within the organization, I'm not going to address it directly until I know it's going to be something that's going to hurt the organization and impact what we're trying to do.
That sounds like, yeah, it does. And that's just like what we were talking about with that forensic financialist, which is that full holistic investigative type approach to fixing a problem, because the problem of an improved bottom line, yeah, we can address it, but there's a lot more to it than just numbers. And I think we've really flowed through that. It makes me think of this, and I know you cannot just, bullet point, check the box and say, what are the fears you have in moving forward? And then they're going to, list for, and then you're going to say, yes, that's all there are. And now let's move past them. But through your process of making sure that you've understood these fears, once they've manifested, you can identify them. How do you help them get past them?
We really have to talk through them. So they need to understand what's creating the fear, right? I mean, sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a matter of understanding. So I would have to really get a better idea of what's creating the fear, and they need to understand what's creating the fear in them. And more times than not, once you can get a better understanding of what's creating that concern, what's creating the issue there, then we can talk through it and address it and move on. And sometimes it's just, sometimes those fears can be addressed in a way that, we can make some changes or recommendations or adjust something that the fear will go away because it doesn't exist anymore. But sometimes that's not the case, and we just have to better deal with it. And the way we deal with it is to better understand why that fear is created and how we can better understand what the future might be based on the decisions that are made. Sometimes it's just a matter of understanding and communicating. Information is so critical. When people feel like they don't have all the information, that's when they get fearful, and lack of trust creeps in. But providing all the information, at least the information that you can provide, I think that's so meaningful to employees, to leaders, and making them feel comfortable with the decisions at hand and the future direction.
And I would suspect too that it's a matter of giving that kind of future hope that that what things will be like, could be like, if we can make these changes and get through it together, and give them that kind of, paint that rosy picture, because it might not hit it 100%, but if you have that goal of here's the outcomes that we're going to achieve by implementing these things, we might not get there 100%, but we might hit it 92%, and that's way better than where we were.
Yeah. And I said before I'm the ultimate simplifier, but I really do think it boils down to you have to be genuine with the people that you're working with. You have to be able to communicate with them, and you have to make sure that they understand that what you're trying to provide is going to be best for them and best for the organization. And don't hold back. Have transparency and do what's right. It's I don't want to oversimplify, but that's at the end of the day, that's what you try to do. You're adding value to others.
Yeah.
You're helping the organization move forward.
So, okay, move forward. Now, let's say you've made that initial, kind of assessment. You see the path forward yourself. You've unearthed some fears and helped them move past that to say, we're all in. We see what things can look like. Once an organization starts moving through this process, the REAR approach, what do you find are some common hiccups and hurdles that you see being made? And then you're right there alongside them to fix them. But what are some things that are kind of some of those common hurdles and mistakes that are being made?
Yeah, apprehension to execute.
Oh, yeah.
And it really goes back to what we were just talking about, fear of the future, uncertainty. And when that creeps in, people become hesitant and they don't execute. So it's really just making sure that we're all on the same page. We all have the information that we need. We're all being transparent, and we have the same end result in mind. Nobody has a hidden agenda. That makes things so much better. But when they feel like they're out there alone or working in a vacuum, or that I'm not being or that I'm working in a vacuum and I'm not communicating enough, then that's when the apprehension kicks in. So it's really the onus is on me to make sure that we're all on the same team and that they all feel comfortable with the direction we're going, because the communication is there and we're taking into consideration all the different factors, all the different potential outcomes, and everybody has sort of a stake in the game. And they're not working alone. Nobody's in a silo. And we're in this together. Now,
and do you find, go ahead.
I was just going to say the worst, and I've had this happen before, is when we get through the whole engagement and business is improved, the organization is going forward, and PEM Consulting is moved on because our engagement has ended. And then the organization, for whatever reason, doesn't continue to follow through. And then we see things sort of fall apart. That's, for me, that is just, gosh, that's so hard to see. And it's happened so often because I know what needs to be done. But, for whatever reason, things just didn't continue within the organization. And, you we all work together to set the organization up for success, and we just got to keep the cycle going. You cannot stop.
And wouldn't it also be the case, I'm sure you've seen this, that you must celebrate and notice the little wins along the way so that it keeps that momentum going?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, every single positive thing that happens needs to be celebrated. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you have milestones in place, that you have goals set up and metrics set up. And once you achieve some of those goals that you set, you got to celebrate. And even if there haven't been major milestones achieved, you got to celebrate anything positive that's going on. I mean, people need to feel satisfied with what they're doing. And, if they feel satisfied, that means they're feeling valued. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely celebrate the wins, every single win possible.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.